Could the U.S. Congress bring about an endgame in Syria? The world is watching as American lawmakers prepare to debate and vote on U.S. President Barack Obama's proposal to launch airstrikes. Let's listen to what President Obama had to say and how the Syrian government is reacting.
Our action would be designed to be limited in duration and scope. But I'm confident we can hold the Assad regime accountable for their use of chemical weapons, deter this kind of behavior, and degrade their capacity to carry it out.
If any aggression were to take place, we will have two options: to surrender or to defend ourselves, using the options available.
Well, to discuss and debate these issues, I'm now joined by Daoud Khairallah, Adjunct Professor of Law at Georgetown University's Law Center. He's opposed to the armed opposition in Syria and favors a negotiated settlement. Also with us, Radwan Ziadeh, spokesperson for the opposition Syrian National Council. He supports international military action against Bashar al-Assad. Great to have both of you on the program. The civil war in Syria has now been going on for something like 2 years. 100,000 people killed. We have millions more who've been displaced. Let me start with you, Dr. Khairallah. Is this a war about democracy, or is it, in fact, a tribal war, a sectarian war?
I think it started probably a legitimate claim for change in the political system in Syria, and there is a need for change. But eventually, when it became militarized, it went beyond the control of the Syrian people, and it is being manipulated from the outside.
If Bashar al-Assad is overthrown violently, what replaces him?
It's, of course, Syria will getting into a stage of transition. Will be difficult because what's happened, the failure of President Bashar al-Assad and the failure of the international community to respond to the violence and the crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity committed by the Assad regime. This is why the Syrian tragedy right now, it's a combination of the failure of the Assad regime, at the same time the failure of the international community, especially the failure of the Security Councils.
But to be fair, though, both sides are committing crimes against humanity or war crimes.
No, there is a quite difference between both sides. We have a state which committed war crimes, crimes against humanity in larger scale, and the one we have it in chemical attacks against Eastern Ghouta, which we have never have it in before.
Well, you know, as we've just seen, we've just had the New York Times produce a video in which we see rebels, shooting soldiers in cold blood.
Of course, we don't deny that the rebels committed crimes against humanity.
Right,
but according to the UN Human Rights Council, it's not in the scope and the scale like what the government of Syria or government of Bashar al-Assad did.
Okay, let me get to the point that Dr. Khairallah made, that there's a battle going on here. Outside forces have now intervened, and they don't really have the interest of the Syrian people at heart.
No, the Syrian opposition reflect actually the hope of the Syrian people to build a democratic Syria and to build a new Syria. What's prevent from that, of course, Bashar al-Assad and his militias, who's fighting with the support of Iran, Russia, China, and other governments. I think if the international community respond at an early stage and prevent such crimes to happen, we don't speak right now about the crisis in Syria or the tragic situation in Syria.
Right. Dr. Khairallah, do you agree, do you share that optimism that, Bashar al-Assad will be overthrown militarily, there will be a transition, and then we will have some kind of democracy in Syria?
Well, the way things are going, I don't see it this way. Whatever popularity he had initially, it has increased after the atrocities that were committed by the liberators of Syria coming from all over the world. Atrocities have been witnessed by the whole world. And I think if Bashar al-Assad, the way things are going, if Bashar al-Assad were to be out of the picture, it will be a failed state, and it will be governed by groups who are on their own, lawless in every respect. We call them, we call most of them those who are really strong on the ground, those who are in control on the ground, are Al-Qaeda and its derivatives and affiliates, and the crimes that they are committing against the Syrian culture, the Syrian people, and this is, I'm surprised that my colleagues here portrays this picture about what is going on and thinks that it is the regime who is committing all these crimes. what is happening on the ground, the militarization of the uprising has given the Syrian regime a lot of strength and a lot of moral support by the Syrian people. He would not remain where he is. The army would not remain coalesced the way it is had it been the other way. It had been peaceful all around.
Okay, let me give Radwan.
It's not my judgment. If you go to all reports of the Commission of Inquiry on Syria, the Human Rights Council, thousands of reports about the Assad regime crimes and massacres, atrocities. And the last one, of course, the use of the gas, chemical attacks, which never been, maybe the last one was Saddam Hussein. Now the Syrian people, it was a natural response to start arming themselves to respond to the use of the violence of the Assad regime.
You have, say, the foreign support that the opposition is getting. Some of that support comes from Saudi Arabia, some of it comes from Qatar. Are these two countries acting in the interests of democracy? Are they acting in the interests of the Syrian people, or are they acting in their own narrow interests?
Hezbollah and Iran and others, do this democratic institutions or democratic countries? No, this is, we don't see in this way. Always there is cross-interest. And now the interest, of course, those countries and the interest of the Syrian people to overthrow of Assad regime, and this is why we're finding a common interest between both parties.
The Syrian opposition is not a monolithic group. It's made up of disparate groups, all of which have their own interests. Radwan mentioned something, Dr. Khairallah, which I want to get back to, and that is the involvement of outside forces. Are we, in fact, seeing a proxy war here?
It is. The war has gone out of the hands of the Syrians totally, I think. The Syrian people started with certain hopes, certain expectations, and it was kidnapped. Those who control the funding, the arming, the training, the opening their borders for interfering in internal affairs of an independent sovereign country, all this is against international law. All this is not in the benefit of the Syrian people. The Syrian uprising, the expectation of the Syrian people are no longer in the picture. They have only one fixation: get rid of Assad. We know why. Getting rid of Assad is not easy. It turned out not to be easy. Therefore, there will be total dependence on arming this uprising. And the army uprising, you need the foreign forces, you need the foreign money, and then the interference, the coming to the picture of countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and undermine the main claim. Are these the bastions of democracy, human rights, women's rights, rule of law, fighting corruption?
Right.
I mean, they are generators of corruption and
they're hardly democracies themselves.
And they're hardly democracies.
Right, okay. Radwan, I just want to go to you. Getting back to the events of this week, if there is a military strike against the government of Bashar al-Assad, what will that achieve? Because the United States has already said this is not about regime change. This is not about tipping the balance in favor of the government or in favor of the rebels or anything like that. So what does it achieve?
This is why we are pushing the United States government to do a strategic overview, not to do just bombing targets related to the Assad regime, rather than having comprehensive vision of that this military should have strategic goal to end the Assad regime and end the Syrian crisis. If the United States continue actually to deal with the symptoms of the results, I mean increasing the funding for the refugees and dealing with all other issues, the main disease of Syria right now, Bashar al-Assad. We have to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And after that, of course, Syria will get in a middle of difficult transition.
Okay,
but the Syrian will be able to handle that.
All right, we've got 10 seconds.
In other words, they want the U.S. to do the war for the opposition.
Okay.
They want the U.S. to do all the dirty job.
They sacrifice, we paid more than 100,000.
Those who are controlling the ground have nothing to do with what Mr. Ziadeh is saying. Those who are controlling the grounds are they have their own plans. They have to establish Islamic Emirates. They want to establish the Khilafah. And they are against each other. This is a unique revolution, they call it, that has no leadership, no independent decision, cannot rely on itself, and even the forces that are fighting are coming from all over the ground.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Thank you.